Rich was a covering lieutenant in the 15th at that time in Brooklyn, and he wasn't assigned to a firehouse. He was bouncing. He was promoted in 1997, February, out of Rescue 5, where he worked for 10 years. And he worked 24, he did a 24 on that night. And he called me up and he said, about 8 o'clock, he said, I'm not going to go to school at Libeti Post because he was studying for captain with all his friends. Libeti Post is on Staten Island, right down the block from Rescue 5. He said, I'm going to go Tuesday in Brooklyn. I'm just tired. I'm going to come home and go to sleep. And I said, okay. And he always called me before he went to bed every night, or I called him to say goodnight to the kids and to say he loved us. And I can remember that day so clear. The sky was all blue. It was the most beautiful day I could remember. And I just brought my kids to school. They went to school at St. Clair's. And I was sitting at my kitchen table, having a cup of coffee, watching Good Morning America. And on the news, you saw a plane hit one of the buildings. And I remember I used to work at One New York Plaza, and that happened back in the 80s or 90s, I can't remember. And it was a kind of regular occurrence with those buildings. And I'm sitting there drinking my coffee, and the news changed. It was N.J. Burkett who went down to World Trade Center and was reporting. I'll never forget that. And the phone rang, and it was Rich. And he said, he was also a Marine as well. He said to me, we're under attack. Go get your kids from school, get gas in your car, and get money. And wait for me to call you. So I went up to St. Clair's. I was the first one there. They thought I was crazy. And I pulled my kids out of school and brought them home. And I went to my, I put gas in my truck. I got money out of the bank. And now I got the TV on, and I'm looking for him because I knew he was going. And he said, I love you. He said, I don't know if I'm coming back. And one of my friends, then I went to my mother's house with my 2 kids, and I stood there for a little while just to figure out what we were going to do. And then I went home, and then I took out my telephone book and the fire department calendar, and I started calling all the numbers on that I knew of for squad and for rescue and for the dispatcher and all the firehouses, and you didn't get any answer. No one was answering your phone calls. And a friend of mine who my daughter went to school with at that time, Valerie, came over, and we were making phone calls to everyone we knew and everyone she knew to try to find our husbands. And there was no word. Now I'm changing the channels, and all I hear is the pass alarms going off. And I know that the pass alarms mean you only have a limited supply of oxygen, and if they're going off more than, you get 11 minutes and 5 minutes, that you're dead. And that's all I kept thinking in my head, that, where's my husband? All I hear are pass alarms going off. I kept switching the channels to see if I would see him, just to get any kind of information. And I kept calling. My phone didn't stop ringing because people were just calling to find out if Richie was okay. People I never heard from, people he knew throughout his life. And, my mother came and she stayed with me. my parents and my kids were downstairs, and I told them not to watch TV. And I just sat there on the couch and kept calling until I got a message or until I could reach someone. And he finally called at 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. And he told me what was happening. I mean, it was a hard thing for him. He was devastated because when you saw those buildings come down, and I know Richie like a book, and he never shied away from a situation that needed his help, or he wasn't afraid to put his life on the line. He was, with all his special training and all the people that responded for Rescue 5 were his dear and close friends. I mean, they all came to our wedding. And he called me and he told me what happened. And he told me everybody was dead. They weren't reporting this on the news at that time. But he said, they're all gone, Mary. They're all gone.
Everyone from his firehouse?
From Rescue 5, yeah, all the 11. A lot of people in Brooklyn that responded there. A lot of people from the Bronx, all the special operations units, the firehouses in the downtown and midtown area. They knew it instantly, and they weren't releasing that information. He said, they're all gone. They're gone. They're dust.
How were you holding things together with your young daughters there?
Well, I made them dinner, and I tried not to tell them anything. Because they really would, Callie was 10 and Tori was 7.
No, it was 8.
8.
She was 5.
8 and 5, I'm sorry. And I put them to bed, and I just kept praying, and that was it. And then when we lived in Staten Island, you knew something was wrong because you saw the bombers come over, heard the the bombers, the special squadrons from the Air Force or whatever they are, the whole, I don't know what that formation, the right term of that formation is called. They came over our house, and you knew it was war.
Callie and Victoria, can you tell us what it was like for you being so young? What your recollections were from that day?
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember I was in 3rd grade in St. Clair. I was wearing my gym uniform because it was a Tuesday, and we just started school. Like, it was literally like the first week of school. I loved school, loved being there. And my mom came in, the lady in the front desk came in and pulled me and my friend Megan out. And I was like so confused, like, why am I getting taken from school? It's like not even an hour into the day. So then we got in the car, and my mom looked at me and said, Dad says the nation's under attack. We have to go home. And I remember going home and seeing like the same picture over and over again of the like towers being flown into with an airplane. It was like really scary, but I did understand, like, my dad wasn't there's a good chance he wouldn't come back. And, I take after my dad and like to eat a lot, and I could not eat anything all day because all I kept thinking about was, oh my God, when's Daddy coming home? Because we had this thing every time he'd come home, I would run up to him and take all his pins off. And like, I was so excited to see him just because me and my mom always butt heads. So then I know like later on in the day, we went to my nanny's house just to like kind of distract us and waste some time. But it really didn't help. It just didn't feel any different, to be honest. I remember just feeling a pit in my stomach all day long. So then I know eventually we came back to my house. I remember we had like a living room where the couches kind of faced the door that you walk in. I remember like falling asleep on the couch and waking up and my dad was there. It was like 6 a.m. or something. And I was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe you're here. But like, I know after 9/11, my dad would work there all the time, and I always remember, like, my dad telling me, like, his friends are all gone, Daddy's friends are all dead. And on top of it, I always remember him saying, like, he always sees ghosts in his room, how it's so, like, scary, how it haunted him, just because he could have been at Rescue 5 that day.
He would have been at Libeti Post, and they all jumped from Libeti Post, the guys that weren't on duty at Rescue 5, like Harvey Harrow, and I don't recall some of the other names. He would have jumped on the rig that day as well with them, because those were all his. That was his company.
It's like he was, like, Saved by the Bell. It was.
He was tortured by that for 19 years.
And then for me, I remember always talking about going to visit the World Trade Center, and we put the car on the Staten Island ferry, and that's something we talked about doing. And I know that, you know, I knew my dad was a firefighter. I guess I didn't know, I don't know how to explain it, but I always remember calling him and asking for Lieutenant Estreicher and saying goodnight. And I remember going to school that day as well. I remember being pulled out, and I remember our 90s television set just with the antennas and everything, and just the World Trade Center being up in flames and not knowing, you know, if my dad's going to come home. I mean, I was really young, so I don't remember all the details of it, but I just knew my dad was a firefighter and he was responding. So, I mean, it was pretty hard to take in. And like Callie said, with my dad losing a lot of his friends, he said he had nightmares. He would see his friends in his dreams. Just really scary.
That they were calling him. I'm going to read you, if you don't mind. What do they call this?
Just to go back off Tori's point, though, we always thought it was funny because my dad always wanted to take us to the World Trade Center and to the Statue of Liberty. And, like, he was saying he wanted to take us that week, like, on the weekend when he was off.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's like, I can't believe this happened. I wanted to take you girls, and now you're never going to see it. Like,
I wasn't a big fan of that building. I never was from when I was a kid. And it just always scared me. And I used to have to take the subway from the ferry when I worked at World Financial Center. And I used to run out of those buildings because I hated them. I hated the sway. And I remember when in 1990, I was offered 2 jobs. And I took the job at 26 Broadway, and it was for a significantly less amount of money just because I hated those buildings. I always had a bad feeling about those buildings. I'm going to read you, if you don't mind, a narrative that Richie had to write for some documentation of his own words. Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely, sure.
On September 10th, 2001, Lieutenant Estreicher had come to work for the 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. On the morning of the 11th, he arose at approximately 7:30 a.m. and called his wife to say good morning, to tell her and their daughters before they left for school. He told his wife that he was tired, and he stayed up until 4:30 a.m. studying for the captain's test. He decided to skip his fire tech class that morning, which class was being held out in Libeti Post on Staten Island. Fire Tech is a class given for firefighters, lieutenants, battalion chiefs, and deputy chiefs who are studying for their promotion exams. He told his wife that he would go instead to the new promotion course on Thursday in Brooklyn. At 8:05 a.m., he was relieved by Lieutenant Antoneri of Engine 250. Lieutenant Estreicher, still uncertain as to whether he should try to get to the class on Staten Island, but finally decided against it and returned to the kitchen to have a cup of coffee. He was in the kitchen with another off-duty firefighter, Larry. You don't remember his last name. When he saw on the television that there was a fire at the World Trade Center. He watched in horror as the second plane slammed into the World Trade Center. Lieutenant Estreicher immediately realized that he was going back to work, and he told Nain, he don't remember his name, to start calling the other off-duty firefighters to come back to the firehouse. The recall announcement flooded out over the voice alarm, and it turned out that Engine 250 Company had a spare engine reserved for blackouts, riots, and big fires. The firefighters began to show up at the firehouse came over the voice alarm. Engine 250 company had a spare fire engine reserved. It's the same thing. As Lieutenant Estreicher waited for the off-duty firefighters to return to the firehouse, he called his wife and told her to go get the kids out of school, and he was going to the World Trade Center. Lieutenant Estreicher was put in charge of the reserve engine. He had approximately 6 men on board when another firefighter called and asked them to wait for them. This happened more than once, but at that time, Lieutenant Estreicher signaled that the engine had to depart, and they departed their call to respond. The first building already came down when Lieutenant Estreicher was on the Brooklyn Bridge, and it exited and turned left to the south on Broadway. The engine was less than a half a mile away from the WTC site, and the second building imploded. Lieutenant Estreicher was told to report to the FDNY command post at Vesey and Broadway. There was no one on the block when he parked the engine. The street was quiet and smoky. There were fire burning all around them, and pass alarms going off everywhere. When a firefighter is down for more than 30 seconds or more and cannot move, an alarm connected to his gear will go off. This means the firefighter is in distress, and at this point, he only has 11 minutes of operational time and 5 minutes of escape time. It's impossible to ferret out from where all the alarms were sounding, impossible to ply through the rubble and thick air to search for all the downed firefighters. Lieutenant Estreicher and his crew walked down Vesey Street to help stretching the hand lines to the WTC buildings 4 and 5, which were totally engulfed in flames. He was then ordered by Commander-in-Chief Deputy Chief Haring of the Division 6 to round up approximately 45 firefighters to search the store areas down at Building 7 while the buildings were still burning. There were reports of civilians and firefighters trapped inside the building. Lieutenant Estreicher's crew descended the escalator out of service at this point, unaware that the building was on the verge of collapse. He did not have radio, but someone else yelled to evacuate the building immediately, that it was going down. Just as Lieutenant Estreicher was outside of the building, it came down around him. It was smoky and difficult to see, with debris and particles flying everywhere as he ran for his life, and extremely difficult to breathe. Lieutenant Estreicher had no concept of time while he was worked that day. At one point, the Commander-in-Chief ordered Lieutenant Estreicher and his crew to take a break. Lieutenant Estreicher borrowed someone's cell phone and called his wife to tell her he was alive. By then, it was 11 to 12 hours later had passed since he has been able to communicate with his family. From time to time, he made that phone call until about 1 a.m. Lieutenant Estreicher searched the collapsed zone. While searching, he met up with one of his former co-workers from Rescue 5, who told Lieutenant Estreicher that 14 firefighters from the company, Rescue 5, were missing and presumed dead. At that point, in both physical and emotional pain, he broke down and cried. He'd heard reports that 450 firefighters were dead, and while the hordes of Mayday transmissions emanated from the rubble. Late into the night, Lieutenant Estreicher was ordered back to the firehouse. He called his wife and told her he was staying there, and she begged him to come home. He went home for about 2 hours, kissed his daughters, and just sat and hugged his wife. He returned to the firehouse the next morning, approximately 5 a.m., and resumed the rescue and recovery operations. Lieutenant Estreicher was assigned something on the WTC 1st Task Force Unit about October 5th. During that time, he collected innumerable body parts, and at one point he was assigned to the hotel areas in the WTC. On the last day he was in that area, he filled 25 to 40 large plastic bags with body parts from the hotel. The smell was unbearable. He and the other rescue workers were forced to place Vicks vapor rub in their noses so they could breathe. One day while he was down at WTC, Lieutenant Estreicher walked over to a group of men, believing they were his friends from Rescue 5, and started to hug them. It turned out they weren't his friends. After all, as these friends had all died in the initial fall of the towers, he saw dead people all the time he was working there, as if they were rising from the ground. It was merely the remonstrance of a well-wishing, and he knew these people were inevitably gone. Lieutenant Estreicher worked at the WTC site continuously from September 11, 2001 to mid-December 2001, and returned to the site as a volunteer many times thereafter. He breathed in the fumes and the airborne particles for hours on end, and suffered much of the pain to his back as a result of the climbing and the crawling through the heavy debris to search for the bodies and the body parts. He suffered a great deal of emotional trauma while performing the recovery operations, and while some of the injuries manifested themselves soon after September 11, 2001, it remains to be seen how the time he spent at the World Trade Center will affect his health as time passes.
And sadly, we lost Lieutenant Rich Estreicher to 9/11 cancer on November 11th, 2019. I'm so grateful that you were able to tell the story. And we hear his story. I mean, it's got to be incredibly difficult to relive this right now.
It's incredibly difficult because there's I don't think this is the place to air this, so I'm just going to keep quiet right now. Him having all that training, he was crawling through so much debris and looking for people, and he was like more than once he thought he saw his friends there, and he was never the same after that. I mean, it was so difficult for him. I mean, so difficult. Nobody knows the side that people like me, I think we're up to 230, the after have suffered, and it's a whole different ballgame.
Is there anything else any of you want to add?
Yeah, I just think it's important to know and reiterate, my dad was a hero. And I feel like a lot of the time people tend to forget that even though people died that day, that there's people like us who are still living through it every day, especially after the death of my dad. I mean, he told me and my sister on multiple occasions he was so scared of getting sick. We tell him to knock it off, don't talk like that. But, it caught up to him, and it's something that's so serious and needs to be talked about and addressed, and more things need to be done. But, he would have done it all over again if he had to, and I believe that. And this is something that affected his life, his family, and I never thought the day would come where, he would get sick because of the sacrifices that he made down to be at 9/11. And, I'm so proud of him because there's not too many people that would do that.
He was a very honorable and selfless man.
And he has a very brave family. I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think the scariest part of this all is that this time last year, my dad was told he was so healthy, everything looks good. Like he was so healthy. He was in such good shape. He was going to the gym all the time. And just from our perspective, I'm sure Tori could agree, we never saw a day that our dad was going to be gone because our mom has always been sick. So I never, we always thought she's the one, life's is gonna expire first. I never thought I'd see the day his life would expire. He was, honestly, for the most part, outside of his 9/11 like illnesses, he's a pretty healthy guy, and like was in good shape, ate well, went to the gym, and like it just like all turned around in like seconds. It was so scary because like last year, I remember him looking at me in the eyes and just saying, "I'm so scared. I think it's happening to me. I just don't feel like something's right." And I just remember up to the time he went to the hospital to like with his stomach hurting, like he was sleeping a lot. I was like, "Dad, like, are you sure something's not wrong?" Like I just had a feeling in my gut too. Like it was, but like no one wanted to admit it. Like if you're sick when you're like that, like especially my dad knows he's healthy. I'm like I would know too because I feel like I take a lot after him. Like we're pretty healthy people. Like if something's wrong, he knew it was something big, and he knew he wasn't gonna. And like unfortunately, the cancer he had, it wasn't like treatable. Even if he got treated, it would still take him over, even if it was a year later. No one survived.
From the first symptom till he died, how brief a period of time was it?
6 weeks.
Well, his stomach was hurting in the summer. Like I would say it started around May, but then it got like more serious as the summer went on. He did more tests. They said it was diverticulitis and ulcers, and
he got a CAT scan too, and they didn't see anything. So that's why it's like so frustrating. And like me and Tori have actually been talking to like other doctors because we want to start a foundation. And like what we're going to do is try to help people get better testing and get mentored better on how to pursue this testing and what the effects are to detect this cancers like these earlier, because something like that, I mean, I think honestly, unfortunately for my dad, either way, it wouldn't have changed the outcome, but maybe for someone else that doesn't have pancreatic cancer, it could change the outcome.
He was there a long time. I mean, he was there from September through December, and then he was again there for the entire month of April. He actually found the last body at the site.
Wow. When was that?
In April, the end of April.
Wow. I just want to ask you one more question because I was speaking with Karen Pfeiffer, the wife of Ray Pfeiffer, who lost, because he had switched shifts with someone. The person that he switched shifts with on that day died, and he lived with that guilt until he was diagnosed with cancer, and the guilt lifted.
Yeah.
Did the same happen?
That happened to Richie. Oh God! Tori had to have tubes in her ears when she was a baby, and the lieutenant who covered for him, him and another firefighter, I know his name, but I can't recall it off the top of his head. He died in his place, and he could never get past that either.
And on 9/11. But I know Dad, besides that too, had severe survivor's guilt because
it was terrible.
Because of like not being at Rescue 5 that day. Like he just like one simple decision changed his whole life. Like, and honestly, I always thought like how lucky we were just to have my dad around us, because like I can't even imagine like me and Tori like growing up with just my dad, especially because my dad always took care of our mom. We never had to worry about anything. We were allowed to go away to college and stuff. Our lives would have been so different if he died that day.
He regretted that decision every day of his life. It was he was not the same. I mean, I had my husband, but I really didn't have my husband. When he walked in my door for those few hours, he was a completely different man. He was gone.
Thank you.
New York's classic rock, Q1043.